And we are live. Sorry about the technical difficulties. My drum tech is off today. Welcome to episode 22 of the Gretsch Afternoon Drum Break. I am really excited to talk to today's guest, Mr. Bart Robley, because he is a multifaceted musician. He is an amazing player, plays in many different kinds of musical situations, is a very versatile drummer, but he is also an educator. Very excited to get chatting with him. Before I bring him on, I want to thank Mr. Matthew Krause of the Working Drummer podcast. I want to thank him for having me as a guest on his podcast, and it was released yesterday morning. It was absolutely a thrill for me. I've been a fan of the Working Drummer podcast now for over 3 years since I met Matt, and always admired his and Zach Albetta's interviewing styles, and it was my pleasure to be a guest on the program. Now, I cannot wait to fill in the blanks and talk to you about his musical journey, his story. I just sent you an invitation, Bart, to join the live video if you have a look at that. And right on. How are you?
I am fantastic, Neil. How are you, buddy?
Great. Are you in the Bart cave?
I am in the Bart cave. I'm sitting here in the Bart cave right now.
No, I don't.
Yes, I am.
I don't have a cool name for my drum room. It's just the drum room, but you've got such a cool, and I'm so excited that you are able to spend some time here, and we can talk about your past, your musical journey, where you've been, where you're from, what you've been doing since lockdown, and all those good things. So thanks so much. And man, are you like on top of it with social media?
Well, I learned from my buddy Chip Ritter. I don't know if you know Chip, but man, that guy, he is on it as far as like just self-promotion. And so I follow his lead. And great guy, great guy. So, and you know what? When you reached out to me, I was all in immediately. You were like, "Hey, you want to be on the Gretsch?" I go, like, "Dude, count me in. Let's go. Let's go." I couldn't wait for today.
I appreciate that, and I've been so excited to talk to you since hearing about you on Matt. That's where I first learned about you, and I was stoked to have you on here so that we can spread the news about Mr. Bart Robley. You're in Fullerton, California, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm in Fullerton. I've been in this house. I've been in Fullerton for 20 years, and I've lived in California for about 30 years. So yeah, living here. Yeah, we built a studio back in 2011, and kind of been going strong ever since.
Yes, that's amazing. Now, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Colorado. I grew up on a cattle ranch that was homesteaded by my great grandfather. Yeah, right. I mean, and a real working cattle ranch. I grew up, every morning getting up, feeding cows, milking, just doing the whole thing. And yeah. I went to Columbine High School, and so that's where I grew up.
Wow, incredible. Now, I read on your bio that you started playing drums very young because you had an affinity, a natural affinity for rhythm. And so, of course, the drum set was an obvious choice.
Yeah, the way that I got started was my mom was a huge Elvis fan. I mean, you watch the old black and white, films of Elvis and the girl freaking out and going crazy. That was my mom. She just loved Elvis, and always had Elvis playing. And when you sent me that text the other day, I had to laugh at it because you said something to the effect of I still call them records because I'm old. And I was like, yeah, I'm right there with you. Anyway, my mom, we had this huge console television, that was popular back in the 70s. It had a record player and everything in it. And so anyway, my mom always had a stack of Elvis records playing all the time. And she listened to Elvis so much that at an early age, I didn't really realize there was other musicians. You know, I thought that when you wanted to listen to Elvis or when you wanted to listen to music, you either A, listen to Elvis, or B, you listen to the old lady in the back of the church playing the out-of-tune piano, one or the other. But you didn't, you know, that was music to me. And so much so that one day my dad came home. I was really young, again, I probably 4 or 5. It's a very early memory. My dad came home and he had 2 records. He had Jim Croce's Greatest Hits, and he had a Tom Jones record. And I remember thinking to myself, man, Elvis sounds really weird. It just didn't. And then at that moment, it kind of equated to me. I was like, oh, other people can do this, you know. And so my mom got tickets to see Elvis at the Denver Coliseum, and that was my first concert. I got to see Elvis.
That is
and it was, again, I was really young. I think I was 5 years old, right around there. And well, yeah, I'd have been 5 years old in 1972. And I got there, and I don't remember the concert as much as I remember the gravity of the event. You know, I remember the gravity of the event very well. And I remember the Sweet well, he had a comedian come out and open up for him, and then the Sweet Inspirations came out and started. They were the opening act, right? His band and the Sweet Inspirations were the opening act. And so they started playing. I was like, oh my God, it's so loud. And I remember covering my ears and then slowly away and getting used to the volume. And then after that, after I got used to it, listened to that part of the concert, and then Elvis came out, and he opened up with 2000 Space Odyssey. You know, that was his big thing, you know. And came out, went into CC Rider, and it was like a bomb went off. It was just, the energy was amazing. And so I remember that. And then right after that concert, within probably 6 months or so, the really famous Elvis Aloha from Hawaii concert came on TV. And there was a camera right off to Ronnie Tutt's left side. And he had this big blue Sparkle Ludwig kit, but a big blue Sparkle kit. We won't hold that against him, right? And and I could see his hi-hat, you know? And I remember thinking, well, is he doing that, or is that automatic, or how is that working? And I was just drawn to it, you know? And so I just bugged my mom, and finally she got me a practice pad and a pair of sticks, and I started down that journey. So yeah, that was it. That's how it started.
I remember being a teenager and actually seeing somebody play drums in person, and I was mesmerized at that hi-hat. I don't know why, but it just looked like, not playing it with his hand, he's playing it, it's doing this. Anyways, drums and cymbals were always, even when I was a kid, and we're the same age, I think, because I was 5.
I think we are.
And so going back to these records, but yeah, just how.
Yeah, right.
Now, did you do lessons, formal lessons? You got the pad and the sticks. Let's talk about that.
So after that, I got the pad and I got the sticks, and my mom worked with a guy that played drums, and his name was Pete Capielli, and he taught me a 5-stroke roll, and he taught me paradiddles. And so I beat on that pad, and it wasn't like one of these cool, you know, it wasn't a cool practice pad like this, you know, or anything. It was you know the one. It's a little square piece of wood, 2 pieces of wood sandwiched together with a piece of rubber on top. Yeah, and right, exactly. Played traditional grip, totally, and worked on 5s, worked on 9s, worked on paradiddles, and then I guess it would have been about the 5th grade, the first year you can join the school band. My dad went to the parent-teacher conference, right? And I just knew he was going to come home with a drum set. I knew it. And he came home with the saxophone. I know. I'm like, are you new around here? What is going on, Dad? And so I played saxophone for the first year, but I didn't really play the saxophone. I would go into the band room and put my saxophone together, and I'd go back to the drums and, bang on the drums. And so finally, my mom talked to the band teacher, and the band teacher said, Bart's kind of drawn towards the drums. Maybe you want to do that. So she went, and there was a little music store in Littleton called Crescendo Music. I think it's still there. It's changed owners, but I think it's still there. And she got me a snare drum and a practice pad and a pair of sticks, and got me studying with a guy who's still in Colorado, still teaching. His name's Rob Heskett. Do you know Rob?
I don't.
He was with Gretsch when they were with Command. Remember that?
Okay. Well, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of when Gretsch and Command were together. That's when I came on board as an endorser, as a side note. But he was with Command, him, and then another guy by the name of Gary Curry. Gary Curry ran a store in Denver called Percussion, or in Inglewood called Percussion Specialties, and so when I could get away from the ranch, because we were pretty rural, we were out there. But whenever I was in town, I was either at Crescendo, or I'd have somebody drive me over to Percussion Specialties. And Rob gave me lessons, and we worked on reading and worked on rudiments, and it was probably, I don't know, a few years in, and finally, Rob said, Bart's probably ready for a snare drum, a better snare drum. So I got a better snare drum, and then I just kind of built from there. I took a lesson and Gary Curry is still around too. He was with Command for a while too. And I don't remember if it was one or two. I think I took 2 lessons from Gary at Percussion Specialties. And when I ran into him years later, him and Rob years later, Rob, of course, remembered me because I studied with him for years, and I was kind of a mainstay at Crescendo. And Gary remembered me, of course, because I was always at Percussion Specialties bugging him. He doesn't remember giving me the lessons, though. I was like, I don't know what that tells you, but I took a couple lessons from him. He probably didn't want to remember me, but he was just such a great guy, really encouraging, both of those guys. And incidentally, Rob he's still in Colorado. He runs a place called Takab Drum Studios out of his house. And in Colorado, everybody has a basement, so he's got it all finished, and he's got some drum sets down there. And just a great guy, and we're still dear friends. And he plays in a couple of bands and worship teams around Denver, and just a great player. And so anyway, I learned. That's how I learned, and then came up, through school band, junior high band, played in the symphonic band, and played in concert bands, and then on into high school, same thing, jazz band, symphonic band, concert band, marching band, whatever. If I could hit it with a pair of sticks, I was in, and just loved it.
What a background, what an amazing foundation that you've had since you were young. And that's an incredible opportunity. And I started playing late in life, nearly 19. And I didn't realize
really
disadvantage. Yeah, I was told early on that it was too old to start. And I just said I would, and I did anyway. But that's amazing. So what kind of reading were you doing? Were you working out of the syncopation book? Were you working out of the Belson book, or something completely different?
No, what we did was with Rob. It was we worked out of the Ted Reed book. We worked out of syncopation. Of course, everybody works out of syncopation. We worked out of stick control. Worked out of stick control. There was a book called Rock and Bass Drum that he worked out of with me for a little while, and that was kind of it. And when we went through syncopation, it was how syncopation is. You play a page in syncopation, and then The next week, okay, now play that page this way. Now apply that to the bass drum. Apply that to the left hand.
Yeah.
Now swing it. Now drive it. And so it's like, and I still do that. I still in my practice time, and it's amazing to me after all these years. In my practice time, I'll have a like syncopation. I'll pull out the Ted Reed book, and I'll put it up on my stand, getting ready for a lesson. And I'll start playing something, and I'm like, wow, this is really challenging. And I've done it a million times. It's really hard to do. And I love it. It never gets old. It just never gets old. And I've been, and I know I'm maybe jumping ahead of the story a little bit here, but like when COVID hit, and in March, when we kind of quit going out on the road and everything,
Yep.
I was practicing in here a lot. And I thought, well, I'm kind of, I want something new. What do I want to work on? So I started working on, I'd done this a few years ago, and you know how things go. You get busy and you don't finish it. So I started playing through Mel Bay's cookbook again.
Oh,
Not the jazz cookbook, but the rockin' cookbook, And, but I started doing it open-handed. So I'm playing left hand on the hi-hat, right hand on the snare drum. And Dave Good, who's a dear friend of mine and an amazing drummer, man. I got stories about Dave Good forever. That guy can play. And he was the one that kind of said something about that. And I'm a big, huge Steve Smith fan.
Yeah.
So I love to play and teach Don't Stop Believing and do the open-handed thing, And so I thought, being a drummer and everything, I thought, well, how hard could this be? I could go through this book open-handed. Dude, it took me a week to get through the first groove, And so I started doing that. And then also I saw a thing online. I don't remember where I saw it, but I follow Tommy Igoe.
Oh, yeah.
And, oh, man, what a player, man. What a teacher and phenomenal guy. And he had put up the first drum solo from the Nard book, Mr. Rudiments. And he had gone through and yeah, did you see that?
Sure did. And the other one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was Main Champion.
The Main Champion.
And he had gone through and he'd written all the sticking is in,
Yep.
So like the turnarounds with the paradiddles and stuff. And I thought, well, I'd played through a few of those, not a lot of them, but quite a few of them, I would say, because there's 105 of them. I thought, I'll buy the book. So I started going through that book, and it was it's just been a lot of fun because not only am I having a good time with it, I'm applying it to different surfaces, a couple of different practice pads, and then, of course, a snare drum. And then now I'm teaching out of the book a lot. I have a lot of my students that are working out of the solos and, playing through them. And we're having a great time with it, and that's a great book. So anyway, I jumped around a lot there. But, yeah, reading, has always been a big part of what I do. I talk to all of my students about reading. And the way I look at it is, if I was going to take a foreign language or a language that's foreign to me, if I was going to go learn Spanish or French or German, I wouldn't go in to the teacher and say, look, I just want to speak this language. I don't want to teach. I don't want to read it and write it. I just want to speak it. So, they'd look at you like you're crazy. So I've always thought that reading was really important. And again, I know we only have so much time, but I can talk for days about, I've gotten recording gigs just because of reading, and stuff like that, just because I could, and maybe not because I was the best guy for the job or the best player, but I was the best guy for the job because I could read the chart. There may have been a guy outside the door that could play better than me, but maybe he couldn't read the chart or couldn't transcribe or something like that. So yeah, reading's a big deal.
Reading really is, and I wouldn't have had the tribute gigs if I wasn't able to read, because there's no way that I was going to be able to learn 4 or 5 different tribute artists for one night, especially if I was subbing in on the gig. So I'm glad I can read.
Right.
So I've many gigs because I can read, and just like yourself, and it's great for the students. It helps them understand what it is that they're playing instead of just mimicking. They really know it. They know what they know. So that's awesome. I wanted to ask you, which drummers were the ones that influenced you early on, who were you really into?
Well, the very first drummer was obviously was Ronnie Tutt, you know, because from Elvis, he was the first one that really made me like, what is that, you know? And then from there, I really, as I was growing up, you know, all the Elvis stuff. So Ronnie Tutt and DJ Fontana, you know, and then of course a lot of the stuff that was recorded in the '70s that Elvis did was Hal Blaine,
Yep.
and so and I, you know, I didn't know that, you know, the Wrecking Crew, what's that, you know.
Yep.
You know, I had no idea about session players back then, you know. So, but you know, so obviously Hal Blaine falls into that category. But then as I got older, I really got into the rock and roll thing. I just, you know, and I think it's because of Elvis, you know.
Awesome.
So I was a kid, you know, growing up in the '70s. So how could you not love Kiss, you know? So I was a big Kiss fan, and then from there, from Kiss, that was it's kind of a funny story. I got into Zeppelin and John Bonham and of course that sort of stuff, and then Tommy Aldridge and Alex Van Halen and all of those guys. You know, they were groundbreaking for me. You know, I still wish I would have written down on a calendar the very first time that I heard a Van Halen record and a Led Zeppelin record, and, you know, celebrated as a religious holiday every year, because it just, you know, changed my life, you know. But Bonham really, I remember I was spending the night at one of my friend's house, and I was always the guy that had all the Kiss records, right? I always had, you know, all the Kiss records. And staying over at my buddy's house, Todd Bale. And Todd said, "Hey, man, when you come over tonight, bring your Kiss records." And I was like, "Okay, I'll bring my Kiss records." So I brought all my Kiss records, and we're sitting in his room, and we're listening to Kiss. And his older brother walks in, and he was the guy that hated Kiss. You know, you hear the stories all the time. He you know, he wanted to beat me up because I had all the Kiss records. And he goes, "Man, those guys are terrible. Have you ever heard of Led Zeppelin?" And I'm, you know, little kid, and I'm like, "Who's he?" "Who's that guy?" He goes, "No, they're a band." And so he went into his room, and he put on the fourth Led Zeppelin record, and so the first song is Black Dog. And as soon as those drums came in, I was like, "What is that?" And I was hooked, you know, just immediately. So Bonham was a big deal. And then, like I said, then Alex Van Halen and Tommy Aldridge and Kenny Aronoff and you know, as I got older, I mean, and for me, I can't just pinpoint one or two guys, because and this happens to me. I'm sure it happens with you too, with students. You know, you get a student that's been playing for a while, or you get a new student that maybe is an adult that's been playing for a while, and they want to work on you with reading, or they want to work on you with, you know, whatever, you know, technique. Right now, I got a really good friend of mine, Isaac Sanchez, and Isaac is a player, man. This guy can play, but he's taking lessons with me. We're working on hand technique. He's, you know, working on fingers and French grip and stuff. Excuse me. And, you know, they'll come in to a lesson, or right now you're taking lessons online, and he is, you know, you watch him play, and you go, "I never thought of that." You know, I'm always learning something from somebody. So, like I say, it's hard for me to pin one guy down and go, you know, that's the guy, because there's so many guys that I love, and girls that I love. Cindy Blackman, you know, I mean, gosh, so many great drummers out there. So many great drummers out there.
I know, and I that's what I love about our community. As a community, but there's so many that you can choose from. I've got, I don't know, maybe 100 albums, vinyl, sitting right over there, and they range from Louis Bellson to Van Morrison to ABBA, and classical, and to the Boss Brass, and every one of those is also different. And those drummers that you mentioned, they all had their sound, and you could tell it was.
Oh yeah.
You could tell if it was Tommy Aldridge. You could tell if it was, especially if it were Bonham, and they had
Oh,
a
yeah.
rock and a sound, and nothing was gridded. That's awesome.
Oh, yeah. And,
Now,
and what you said, too, you go back into old school stuff. I mean, the second you hear Buddy, you're like, that's Buddy, or Louis Bellson, talk about early influences and Gretsch. I mean, come on. Louis, he was the first one to play double bass, the very first one, 1946, right?
yeah, I think so.
I think it was 46. I could be wrong. Somebody
Yeah,
Google that, but
it's
I'm pretty sure it's 19.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And man, just groundbreaking. And I heard stories about Louis. I met him a few times. I never got to play or take a lesson with him, but I know a couple of people that did. And as a groundbreak, one of the best drummers in the history of the world. He was one of the big three, the original big three. I've heard stories that he would lay behind students, and he was a big proponent of playing heel down, and he would lay on the floor behind students and hold their heels on the floor. And I used to think, man, here's one of the most, he played with Duke Ellington, and what an amazing drummer, but he would humble himself to lay on the floor and hold people's feet so they could play the drums. That is phenomenal to me. And what you said, Neil, yeah, we belong to like a community. Drummers are a different breed. There's like a brotherhood, I mean, you go to the NAMM show, or you go to a drummer show, you go to PASIC, and you go to all these, you go to drum circles, you do all this stuff, and it's much like sports in that there's maybe a competition, but it's more of a friendly thing, and it's more like, hey, how did you do that? Show me that. And then, there's always two guys over their practice pad showing each other stuff, and I love that. I love being a part of that. I love it.
Yeah, me too. And as the show trucks on here, I'm finding that the response is more and more positive, and people are willing to give of their time. I had a musician friend of mine say that drummers are like the goalies of the hockey team, and I'm thinking, well, yeah, because in a way we're isolated, but we're still so much the anchor part of a team, but we're different because guitar players generally don't want to share as much as drummers do, and I'm not saying anything about guitar players except for that. When did Gretsch drums enter your life? When were you first aware of them? What was your first set, and why?
Well, my Gretsch drums, back to what I was saying earlier about like Crescendo Music and Percussion Specialties. Okay, those two stores in Colorado. When I was younger and I didn't know anything other than I just wanted to play the drums, I would hang out at Percussion Specialties, and I'd look at all the drum sets, and I could never afford one. There was just there's no way. And like you said, we're the same age or close to it, and I remember growing up, there wasn't a good entry-level kit. There just wasn't. There was either pieces of junk, or they were the real high-end stuff, right? There was no, like now, Gretsch has, the Catalina series and all these different series of drums. They didn't have that when we were coming up. And so I would go to Percussion Specialties, and the three brands that were the standout brands were Gretsch and Ludwig and Slingerland, and Gretsch was always the Rolls Royce of the drums, and the Gretsch players were always the guys that were just so sought out and so revered. Louis Bellson, right? In rock and roll, DJ Fontana, DJ with Elvis, he played a Gretsch kit,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
The Rolling Stones, Charlie Watts, he played a Gretsch kit. And then years ago past, and you got Vinnie Colaiuta, and that guy, man, he's a freak in nature. That guy comes from the planet drum. Nobody can play like that. And he plays Gretsch, And so Gretsch were always, like I say, they were the Rolls Royce of drums. And so it was 2009 when I got on the roster. And did you know Kim Graham?
I don't know, but I've heard of her.
Yeah, she was the lady that signed me. She was just salt of the earth. Kim was the nicest, sweetest lady, and she turned me down 2 times. I launched all my stuff and got turned down twice, and finally on the third launching, she signed me to the roster, and now you know what? And I'm going to circle back around here in a minute because you talk about the tribute world and reading, and I'm going to really hit on that in a minute. But Kim signed me, and I dug this out. I'm glad I had it. I found this. This is from 2010. Okay, you know how you have those little moments in your life where you're like, oh, I can't believe this is happening for me. You know, those really cool little things with drums, and this was one of them. After I got signed, I couldn't believe I was on the Gretsch roster. So the next year at NAMM, I walk into the Gretsch booth, and I'm talking to Kim, and I'm talking to everybody, and I'm really nervous because there I am. I've been to NAMM a million times, but now I'm on the roster and with all the great players, right? And so I pick up this, and this is from 2010, the Gretsch catalog, right, with Stanton Moore on it. Okay, and I'm thumbing through it, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh. And so there's my picture right there back when I had long hair. I actually had hair. There I am right there.
There you look. I have that catalog. I have some too. That's
yeah. And I'm on this page with like right beside me or right down below me is Dave Northrup. Dave Northrup is such an amazing drummer. He plays with Travis Tritt and the Oak Ridge Boys and Vinnie Colaiuta and Phil Collins. And there's my picture. And I'm standing in the middle of NAMM, and I almost started crying. You know, I was just blown away. Just so happy about that. That was such a cool moment for me. You know, such a cool thing.
That is incredible.
Yeah, so that's how I got signed to the roster, and then I got on I'm on the education team and all that stuff, and I watched Mike Johnston when he first I watched his videos and stuff, and I watched one of his videos, and he was talking about when he first got signed to Gretsch, and he started talking about the legacy of Gretsch and kind of what we're doing here, you know, Louis Bellson and all these amazing players, and he talked about now it's time to up your game because you're on Gretsch. You have to. You're not, you know, you're with Gretsch. You're representing Gretsch. That's a big deal. And so, yeah, time to play. Time to play.
Now, you moved to LA in '89, I believe it was?
Yes, I did.
Give us the backstory on that. So you were in Colorado until you were in your early 20s, and then you moved to the Big Smoke of LA.
Yep.
Your dream as a drummer. Fill us in what happened there and talk about the band that you were in called War Crime. Let's hear about that.
All right. So I moved to Southern California. I was in a band before War Crime called Blue Max. I was in Colorado. There was I didn't really feel that nowadays there's a great music scene in Denver. There's a fantastic music scene in Denver. And there was a few places when I lived there that you could play. There's a handful of places that you could play and do gigs. But I knew that I just didn't want to. I wanted to get out of there. You know, I wanted to get away from the snow. It was literally there was times you'd have snow up to your waist. Do you get a lot of snow where you live?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, and I do. After this many years, I miss the seasons. I really do. But whenever I go back and I have to deal with the snow, I'm like, man, forget it. I don't want to do that. So if you had, you know, a job or you had a gig or you did something, you'd have to leave early. I just wanted to get out of the snow. So I moved to California. I had a friend out here. His name is Craig Cower. Craig's was in a band called Blue Max. He had come out here and started. And they were, he was always having trouble with drummers, and he and I had played together in Colorado. And so I moved out here to play with that band. And I came out and jammed, so the bass player knew who I was, but I kind of came out on the advice of Craig and sight unseen, you know, didn't play a lot and with the band, but came out here and got the gig and played with them for about 5 years. Wow. And then played around the LA scene, did the whole whiskey, Gazaris, Troubadour deal, you know, and got out of that and got into War Crime. I had met the bass player for War Crime. His name was AJ Shad. He was the bass player for War Crime. He was in another band that played around at the same time, and he introduced me to a guy by the name of Steven Senker, and we put together War Crime. And it was the first time that I heard Steve play. It was on a demo tape, and it was 4 songs, and he just, man, I was like, I got to play with that guy. Got to play with that dude. He was just, his lyrics and his guitar playing and his voice and everything. He was just, and at that point, he was really on top of his game. And so we formed War Crime, did that for about 4 or 5 years, right around there. And when I was playing and we were doing the same thing. We were playing all the clubs in Hollywood. Well, we played the Roxy in Hollywood. We were playing mostly Orange County. Then we kind of decided, you know what, we want to do some covers so we could start working a little bit more and instead of spending so much money, make some money. And which that was a whole nother futile effort, but we went in swinging and ducking, and the band kind of finally just disbanded. And at the time, I was kind of burned out on that style of music. I liked it. I still love hard rock and heavy metal. I mean, I do, but I got tired of just having really loud guitar, really loud bass, and really loud drums. And, you know, I wanted to do something else. And because growing up in Colorado, the first job that I had, believe it or not, I was about 11 or 12 years old. My mom worked at this place called the Country Palace. And it was a big restaurant showroom. And it was a lot of the bands of that era, if they were on the way up or on the way down, you know, having had a career or on the way to launch their career, would play there, right? And it was all country music, and so I really liked country music. I grew up, you know, again, listening to Elvis and stuff, but also Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Alabama, the Oak Ridge Boys, all that stuff. I grew up listening to that. And so anyway, War Crime was kind of falling apart, and I was really familiar with country music. I had not played it. And I met Sam, and we became friends. And his drummer couldn't do a gig one day, and he asked me to sub. And I went in. He had to drag me in. I went in, you know, just, you know, like I was so nervous, and it was a nothing gig. But I was like, man, I don't want to blow it for this band, because I was coming from like a hard rock thing, and now I got to play Waylon Jennings, and he kept it more like, you know, Southern rock. We did a lot of Leonard Skinner and some Allman Brothers, but we were playing some country stuff too. So I went in just pounding, you know, but we got along great, and he liked my playing, so I did a handful of gigs with him, and he had another drummer, and long story short, that drummer ended up leaving the band. And Sam called me in, I played, there was a big club out here called the Crazy Horse, and it was New Year's Eve it was Millennium, right? So it was 99 to 2000. And I went, and I was the first drummer to play on the stage at that Crazy Horse, right? Wow. And I played the grand opening. We opened up, we opened up for, it's a band, you remember Diamond Rio?
Sure do. What can those
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, man. So we opened to them. And that was cool. And then, again, I was still just a sub, you know. And so after that is when his drummer left. His drummer left the band. And he called me up, and he goes, hey, I've got a gig coming up. And it's a three or 2 week tour over in Europe. And he goes, my drummer just left, and the guitar player left with him, and I have a new guitar player, and the gig's yours if you want it. And I said, I'm in. So I jumped in the band. I did one local gig with him, and next thing I know, we were on a plane heading to Germany. and we played all through the Balkans. It was a time during the war over there in Bosnia and Kosovo, and we played for the military. And when we came home, we incidentally, Sam wrote a song about it called Peacekeepers, and you can find the video to that on YouTube, a song called Peacekeepers. But we played all through the Balkans, and literally, not so much in Bosnia, but when we were in Kosovo, Bosnia was trashed. It was a war-torn country. But when we got to Kosovo, it was still going on. We literally played it during a time of war. I mean, you could hear them outside. Like when we were in, I think it was called Camp Bonsteel. I could be wrong about the name of the camp, but we were in Kosovo, and it was a NATO base. And we were up on this hill, and I remember it was really ominous. There was all these, they weren't crows, but there was these black birds everywhere. It was creepy. All these black birds, and you could hear these people shooting and fighting down in the city below us. And so anyway, that was my, and when on this tour, we were going around with the military. We flew on Chinooks and C-130s and drove around we had a tour bus, but when we were on the bus, they had Humvees in front of us and Humvees behind us. And I figured if I survived a war zone with the guy, I'd stick with him. And so I've been in the band for 21 years now. But
Correct.
yeah, Sam Morrison Band. And we also have, and that turned into the tribute thing, the Turn the Page thing, exactly what you do doing the Bob Seger tribute. Exactly the same thing as you do, but doing Bob Seger.
That's cool. Yeah, you play. I'm playing some ABBA music, and you're playing something a little more rock and roll. Though I absolutely adore playing the ABBA show. Let's switch gears and talk about the other half of your musical life, which has been as a teacher. We're very similar paths, you and I, but I love the teaching, and I love having a curriculum, and I love teaching. I just, really enjoy that aspect. Let's talk about yours, and let's also talk about the books that you've written that I know Matt Krause uses your books for his own students. Let's talk about that.
That's awesome. Thank you, Matt. Matt's awesome. And the Working Drummer podcast, come on, man. That's good stuff. That was so cool being on that. I haven't heard yours yet. But it's up now, right? It
is, yeah.
Cool. As soon as I hang up here, I'm going there. I'm going to listen to it. So, teaching, I don't know if you're like me, but when I was coming up, of course, when you get older, there's the bravado where you want to be the best. I'm gonna show this guy. I'm gonna go play my double bass and smoke him. But then, like you said, as you get older, it's more like now you're buddies, and you don't worry about that. And there was always a friendly competition, right? Well, when I was coming up, it was that same way. If you were one of the band guys, you wanted to keep up with the guys in band, right? And so I worked very hard, and I wanted to be good, but I didn't really care about being the best. I can still tell you the people that I played with all the way going through school, and I wasn't one of the best ones. I wasn't. I was just one of them, and I loved that. I just loved that. Joel McCluskey, my God, that guy could play so good. And then, hey, the band Big Head Todd and the Monsters?
No, I don't know.
Okay, you got to check out Big Head Todd and the Monsters. They are a band from Colorado. And it's funny, Brian Nevin is the drummer. Okay, he's not a Gretsch guy. Again, we'll let that go. We're not going to hold that against him. He's a heck of a guy, heck of a drummer. I went to high school with those guys, and they always joke around because they've made a career out of it. I mean, they play. They're the real deal. I mean, they're great. And Brian was one of the guys that I was in school with, man. And I would take lessons from him, and I'd learn from these guys that I went to school with, right? Well, then, of course, there's some guys that you go to school with that maybe you're better than them, so they would come and take a lesson from me, right? And at that point, I started realizing, hey, maybe I could, make a couple of bucks at this. It started out like that at first. And I worked at a music store, there's a chain of music stores in Colorado called Von Knight Campbell, and they were like in malls. And so half of the music store was a piano organ store, and the other half was musical instruments, guitars and drums and reeds and stuff, you know. And they gave lessons there, and so I started teaching drums out of there. Like I said, originally, just to make a couple extra bucks. And then I started realizing that my students were making progress, and I loved that. I was like, okay, I'm helping this kid like Rob helped me, and he's thankful for it. And then, so I started building a little business, and I'd make house calls, and I'd go to people's houses and stuff. And, you know, that's how it started. And that's how it started. And then when I came out here to California, I just I did the same thing. And I think to teach, I think you got to really want to do it. You know, I mean, you got to really want to do it, and you've got to enjoy seeing. I enjoy seeing students reach their goals. I had one of my drum teacher friends one time said to me, he goes, he said, you know, I don't like it when a student of mine all of a sudden, you know, after 4 or 5 years of lessons, starts playing better than me, and I'm like, are you kidding me? That's gold. That's what you want, you know. I mean. I always loved that, you know. I just love that because you're living vicariously through them and you've helped them reach that. So I love teaching. And you know, you hear sometimes people say, well, people that can't do teach. Hey, I'll tell you what. Tell that to Michael Jordan when he holds one of his basketball camps, you know. Tell that to Steven Spielberg when he teaches a film class at UCLA, okay? Who do you want to take, you know, basketball lessons from, Joe the basketball player or Michael Jordan? Come on. So anyway, I was on my soapbox a bit there. No, but I love teaching. I started, and I really, my first book, this is my first book, The School of Hard Rocks, right here.
I like that.
What's a good... There I am again. Look, I told you I had hair at one point in my life. See that?
You look so young.
I was. That was 1,000 years ago. My wife took that picture. Yeah. So anyway, I wrote this book, and I didn't, honestly, when I wrote the book, I didn't know I was writing the book. I was just writing down. Actually, I wrote the book because I was studying at the time with Ralph Humphrey.
Wow.
And man, that guy he would give you these exercises, and they were impossible. So I started writing these exercises as a means to an end to getting through his exercises.
Wow.
Well, then I started teaching them to students, and then I started compiling them. And then the next thing I know, and I didn't even compile it to put it together as a book. Like I said, some of the stuff's written on the wrong line and everything. I just wrote it out, and I showed it to Ralph, and he was like, wow, that's really cool. You ought to try to get it published. And I just put a key in there that this is a snare drum and pointed out a couple other books that had the same thing. I was like, okay, cool. So I did, and I got published with Center Stream Hal Leonard. Wonderful. And I did a DVD for that book. And then my second book, actually, I think this is the one that Matthew uses, the Drummer's Survival Guide. Now all this is, believe it or not, and this was another thing, it was a means to an end in my lessons. You know how when you're writing out a drum group for a student, I don't know how you write, but I'm sure you probably do the same thing. Let's say you're writing out a drum group for the student. You'll start with the feel, right? So if it's an eighth note, you draw eighth note hi-hats, right?
Yeah.
Okay, then you'll draw in what the snare drum and the kick drum is doing, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so this, you don't have to do that. All the hi-hats are written out for you.
Yeah,
fill in the blank. Well, then I did that in 1 and 2 bar phrases. I did it for 16th notes, and then I did it for a shuffle thing. Now on the shuffle, you know, you either have to write in the ghost note or you have to write in the 8th note rest. And then the same thing for a jazz pattern. And
wow.
Again, both in 1 and 2 bar phrases. And it makes teaching and learning, like if you're just learning a groove, you're like, what did he do? Listen to it and you write it out. Oh, that's what it was, you know. And then in the front of the book I had the rudiments, you know, got the 40 rudiments. And then same thing with my snare drum book, Rock and Pop and Snare Drum. Oops.
That's cool.
Yeah, same thing. And so, yeah, I wrote those, and I'm in the middle of writing. I actually have three more books that I'm writing, and I wrote a book out of almost what you said, the transcription stuff that you do for the tribute bands.
Yep.
We got signed to a record label with record producer Michael Blum, who has worked with Madonna and Pink Floyd and all these amazing artists, to re-record all the Bob Seger stuff, right? Which we
Wow,
did, and
wonderful.
this was when, oh, it was great, and it was when iTunes was really viable and everybody was still buying music,
Yeah.
and so I knew we got signed to 3 records. The first record was good, but I knew going into the second and third one that I had to read them. So I transcribed every song, every note, and I got to the point where I recorded those records, and I got a lot of gigs from him as a session player. This goes back to the reading thing,
Cool.
where I don't have other musicians in the studio with me if I'm doing a re-record. I transcribe it out. I go in. I'm playing to click. We compare it, and I'm done. And I've done a lot of re-records for commercials for television and movies and jingles that way because of my ability to transcribe. Now, I know I jumped off the subject of the books and the education there, but I teach all those things.
Yes.
I've done many recordings with Michael and with Sam, Sam is becoming such an amazing producer. The guy's phenomenal, and really becoming a great producer. And that's how we record now. We do a lot of our records that way, and where it's, I'll record here and the other guys layer it on top. We do the thing where we do write together and we record together as well. But a lot of re-records that I do, I just read down the charts, and had I not been able to read and transcribe, wouldn't have been able to do it. So
That absolutely ties it all together. The lesson material that you learned from an early age, plus all the live experience with the many different styles of music, able to transcribe, you can bang, you can play it. You could probably even practice it at home so that when you go in and do the master recording, that you play it right the first time. That's awesome. Now that's a really nice, well-rounded career. You've got a lot of live playing with Sam, and I know before COVID shut everything down, you guys played a lot. And I was hosts, I'm like, here he is again. That's how you play a rock and roll show, folks.
That became my catchphrase, because one night, you know what? We did a gig, and it went really well. And I was like, that's how you play a rock and roll show. Well, then it kind of became a thing. And so, I made it a thing.
I'm going to steal that. And when ABBA Revisited gets on the road again, I am going to go live, and I'm going to direct it at you. And oh, that's so cool. I love it.
I can't wait. Well, you know what they say, good composers borrow and great composers steal. I don't have an original bone in my body, man. I'm just doing what all my buddies did and all my heroes did.
Right. I'm always just trying to measure up to my drum heroes as well.
Yep.
The Jeff Piccaros, the Vinnies. Jeff was very dear to me. Larry London as well. I got a chance to hang with Larry for maybe 10 minutes at a clinic years ago.
Oh, wow.
But but you got to see Louis. I never got to see Louis. I have a letter here from Louis Belson that
really
20 years ago I wrote him care of Remo, and 2 weeks later I got a letter, a handwritten little note. Well, yeah, so that's very dear to me for sure.
Yeah.
What's happening with you now for the rest of 2020? Anything happening, or more of the same? Doing online teaching? Any in-person lessons?
Well, I'm hoping that my buddy Neil of Fortune calls me again and we get to hang on the internet like this. Yeah, I'm doing. Excuse me, I got a frog. I'm doing a lot of online lessons.
Yeah.
I'll show you I'll move my tablet here in a second and show you before we sign off. I do a lot of online lessons, and I'll show you how I do it from the Bart Cave. And in this right here, okay, I'll start with this. I just got a new Mac, new to me. And actually, I stole that line from you. I'll tell you why in a minute. New to me, because I bought this from my buddy Stevie D. He got a new computer, and he sold me that one, and it was loaded with Logic, and it's 32 bits. So I'm recording, so I'm recording all my drum stuff here, and so that's kind of what I'm doing here now. So I'm doing a lot of that, and I'm really learning. I mean, that's people are saying, well, what are you practicing during COVID? I'm practicing that, and I'm practicing a lot too. Don't get me wrong. I think I have a drum book I'm going through. I have my maintenance work that I do every day, just rudiments in hand stuff. I always have a book I'm going through. And then I just sit down and raise hell for 20 minutes, and just have fun. And I think that's the way you build, that. But anyway, so here's where I teach from and I record from. Don't want to drop my tablet. So let's see. Well, there's that.
Yeah. Okay.
So you see that, and then right above it, so what I do is on this computer here and that little mixing console, the drums are mic'd up, and there's 2 sets of mics on the drums, okay? So one of the sets of mics, I probably could have taken it off the stand a little bit, it'd been a little easier, but one of the sets of mics is for the lessons, and all I have on that is I have a kick, a snare, and one of the overheads. And then the other mics are going into the Mac over here, so it's just ready to go for recording. And then I have an HDMI cable going from here up to the television you saw, and I have a 3-camera setup, one in front of me, one by my hands, and one by my feet for the lessons. And when the COVID thing hit and everything kind of shut down, I'd been teaching online for years, so there was a huge, how am I going to do this scheduling thing? But once that kind of happened, it all fell into place. And the funny thing is, at first, all my students were like, God, I want to get back in person, and so did I. But then once I started upping the cameras and upping the sound and everything, they're like, well, I can see your hands really good. I want to stay here. So, that's kind of, I don't know. We'll see what happens.
What's the latency like? Because the latency that I've heard is
latency is go ahead. Sorry, say that again.
Yeah. So if you're playing at the same time, that doesn't really match, correct?
Right. Yeah, you can't do it. So what I do is you can't really play together, right? So what I do is if the student, for instance, is playing, and it goes for a song or a metronome, whatever. They're playing a part on their end. Yeah. I have them turn it on, and I can hear it. And I don't have any speakers in here. Everything is usually on my Ultimate ears or whatever, So there's no feedback. I'll hear what they're playing. I'll hear the song, and I'll listen to them, and then I'll critique them. And then if I need to demonstrate, they turn it off on their end, and I play it on my end. So you click, song, whatever. And what I do is I have a couple of screens open at the same time. So what I'll do is I will, I'll have, let's say they want to work on a piece, okay? I have all the stuff like in PDF files, and I have one of the screens open with their email address. So if they're like, well, I want to play Mr. Rudiments. I want to play Mr. Rudiments. Oh, hold on just a second. And this is copyright, so I'm probably going to get arrested now, but I'll have it in my PDF. Yeah, copyright, please. Yeah, exactly. Neil, come get me.
I don't know this guy.
I don't know. Never seen him before, man. But they, he used to have hair last time I saw him. No, they take the, I'll take the PDF and I just grab and cut and paste their email address, bing, ship it to them. They grab it on the other end, and away we go. And then I look at the music up on. You know what? The only downside is I'll put the music up on the big screen, and I'm reading the music, and I can't scroll down, so I can't. You can't see the whole thing. So we'll usually play a section at a time.
We have just over 30 seconds. People can find you at bartrobley.com.
They can, Bart Robley.
Facebook and on Instagram, what's the Instagram handle?
BartDrum67.
Bartdrum. I want to thank you so much. I could do another hour, perhaps.
Oh man, me too.
With a handful of previous guests, but You've been amazing, and it's always a pleasure for me to see what you're posting online on the web. Ladies and gentlemen, check out my guest here, Mr. Bart Robley. Tune in next week for another fantastic guest on the Gretsch Afternoon Drum Break. Bye, everyone.